Thank you. Hello, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As folks continue to log on, I'm going to encourage folks to remember that we have some technology pieces that we want to address. The first really being we have the ability to do this particular meeting in English or Spanish. So to support that technology, I believe at the bottom of your screen, you can select whether you're going to do the English channel or the Spanish channel.
Sí,
And
así
Heather,
que
exactly where can, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mark. My apologies.
just was going to do the announcement in Spanish. Is that okay, Nu?
Please. Yes, please.
Así que tenemos la habilidad, buenas tardes a todos, para poder llevar a cabo esta reunión en ambos, el inglés y el español, tecnológicamente. Entonces, al pie de la pantalla van a ver la opción del idioma, que tienen que seleccionar específicamente el inglés, si hablan en inglés, y español, si son hispanoparlantes, como para poder escuchar en su canal el idioma de preferencia.
Right, so at the bottom right-hand side of your Zoom screen, there should be a little globe there and it says interpretation. You can select English or Spanish, so please do that. We also have the option for closed caption today, so that's available as well. Is there any other housekeeping pieces on that OHA team that I need to cover, make sure I cover?
I'm not seeing the closed caption option.
Thanks, Kurt. Can somebody help us determine where that closed caption piece is?
The link will be provided in the chat. I'm working on getting that link now. It's not the same as it was last time. Apologies.
Thank you, Heather. Shall we go ahead and start? I have that it's 1:04. So I'm going to go ahead and start this afternoon's partnership meeting. I want to welcome everyone. Again, my name's Nuto Haynes. I am the facilitator for this meeting, and I want to welcome everybody to August. I can't believe it's already here. It goes by so fast in the summer, and so I hope that you all have been enjoying the summer. Not so much the heat for me, but the summer overall. And so with that, I do want to let folks know that we do have OHA staff available to assist throughout this particular meeting. We do have Liz Garst, who will be helping monitor the chat for me. So if the raise your hand function isn't quite working and I'm not recognizing you, please just be aware that Liz can shoot her something in the chat, or just go ahead and use the raise your hand function. She'll help monitor the chat. We also have Heather Owens, who will be helping with our interpreter services and any of the technical pieces that come about for you. If you're having trouble, please go ahead and reach out to Heather. And as always, we have Christy Hudson, who is really, you know, the lead on this particular group for OHA. And so any of that background information, she can actually help answer as well. I do want to note that we have Kara Biddlecom as well. She's our Deputy Director for OHA. And so any of those additional questions that you might have, she'll help field some of that as well. And so again, my name's Nuto Haynes. I go by she, her pronouns. I know that part of what we do is really try to connect with each other. So if you all don't mind in the chat, so we can make sure that we get a feel for our members. If you're part of the partnership member, please put in your pronouns, and then also if you've been staying up late, kind of like me, watching the Olympics at weird times, put in the chat which Olympic event that you have been kind of keeping your eye on, right? And so put that in there, and then that helps us to get to know each other a little better. We do have a very full agenda today. The first part of the agenda will be finalizing our charter and really looking at where our work group, our charter work group has got in the last month. And then before the break, what we'll probably do is actually take some time to look at planning for next month's September meeting. There's a lot of logistical pieces to that, and so we want to kind of check in on that. I'm going to have folks take a break just before 2 o'clock, and at 2 o'clock we'll have our guest presenters come on board. Now, if you all recall, last month, we had the discussion around really wanting to learn a little bit more about some of the strategies and what's going on in that particular strategy as far as we need more information. So we've brought in a couple of folks to do that. And I will introduce them at the top of the next hour. I want to pause for a second and see if anyone had any questions or comments or wanted to add anything to the agenda for the next 2 hours. I see a lot of good comments about the skateboarding. I just want to acknowledge, I thought those young women were amazing. If you haven't watched skateboarding, they were pretty cool. Any other additions do folks want to add, or any other? You can unmute and comment on Olympics. I'm okay with that too. So anything else? Okay. Lots of track and field people. Okay. All right, so this is our agenda. We're going to go ahead and move forward. So the first thing that we have on our agenda is, sorry y'all, I'm looking at the the chat and I'm seeing the soccer pieces. Wow, I can't believe the US got knocked out. Okay, that's my last thing. I'm a really big sports fan. Kara, did you have your hand up? Do you want to comment?
I'm sorry, not about the Olympics, because like
okay, no problem.
I'm sleeping at night, but enjoying reading about all of it. And second Esther's comment. I did just want to apologize to the group this afternoon and let you know that we did not have the closed captioning ordered today. So the lack of putting those links in the chat, I just wanted to verbalize, and I'll also share it there, but we do not have closed captioning this afternoon, and I'm sorry.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you for letting us know that. I appreciate that. All right, folks. So the first thing that we have on our agenda for the hour is that we wanted to hear from the work group that worked for a couple hours, couple meetings, helping to finalize the charter. The charter, if you recall from the last meeting, has come to like a really nice kind of spot in its progression. And thank you for the group that worked on it the first go around. So this next group kind of took on some more of the details around membership, around public meeting. And so the work group basically came together for a couple meetings and kind of fine-tuned some of the messaging and wording in and around the charter. However, folks really from the work group really wanted to get more input. They felt that from this larger group to get it to a place where, you know, there was a little more agreement to some more important pieces, some important pieces to it. And so what I'll do is I'm going to invite the work group, and this particular work group met over 2 more meetings, and we had a really good conversation about membership and the role of membership. What did folks feel like? How should the governance be? Should it be a co-chair, vice chair type of format? Could the responsibilities fall in line as a steering committee? And so what I'll do is I'll invite Stan, if I can invite you to share to the group what some of the process pieces for our work group. The work group this last month on the charter was Susan Blaine, Stan Baker, we had Rachel Schultz, we also had Tamir, and I believe Amy was also on the work group. And so these folks put a couple more hours into this. And so I'm going to turn some of that conversation over to Stan. And that first piece is really asking about membership.
Thank you very much, Nu, for the great job you're doing as our facilitator. And it was the entire work group put time and hours into trying to take it to the point we've presented to the partnership as a whole. When it comes to membership, we had several thoughts there. As far as on terms, we were all, of course, been pointed to a 4-year term. And so on the draft of the membership, we put down as an end date at the end of, this is 2022. So we looked at, we go over 2022. We looked at it as though we had been appointed at the end of 2019. So we 2020, 21, 22, 23. So December 25th of 2023 is we looked at our terms as ending. We looked at how to deal with the issue of proxies, or those that might be delegates for those that are not able to attend. And we went kind of back and forth on whether or not those delegates should, if they're allowed, should be allowed to vote or not, because they're not an appointed member. The other piece, as far as on the delegates and the proxies, there was some concern that if a member consistently had a proxy or delegate rather than themselves, perhaps it might be better that there's someone that could participate on a regular basis, could be part of what we're doing. Of course, if there's medical leave or sickness and so forth, that would let us know a proxy could be appointed for during that time and even perhaps vote for that particular sector. But this is something we wanted to have the guidance of the committee as a whole. It was also thought that that person should represent the sector that the actual appointee does address. So as far as in membership, those were the main things that we wanted to deal with without going into leadership. Is there anything else I might have missed, anyone? The question then for the partnership would be on the piece, on the Word document that Nu sent to us, is do we allow proxies? What is the appropriate use of proxies, limited time, medical leave, parental leave? This could be considered on a case-by-case basis, perhaps by the steering committee. And if sending a proxy, do you feel that that individual should represent the sector that the member represents? Or how do you see that we should go about this?
So the question really to this group, the wider group for the partnership, is how do folks feel about proxies? We both Christy and I get emails letting us know that folks can't make it and things like that for various reasons. And so how does this group want to handle that? How do you feel about if Stan's unable to make it to meeting, he would send a representative? I'm just using that as an example. can we open it up to some comments?
This is Susan. I was on the committee and I am in favor of using proxies, of people being able to send a proxy, particularly if they're facing a situation where they might not be able to attend for a few months in a row, but foresee rejoining the group a little further down the line. And I do feel really strongly that the proxy should represent the sector that someone is representing on the partnership. It would, I think it would disrupt the integrity of the selection process to make sure we had a great cross-sector group if people were selecting proxies that didn't really represent the group that they had been selected to represent.
Thank you, Susan. Other thoughts? Kurt, please go ahead.
I would probably take the other side of that, not, I don't think a proxy would be good. In my opinion, there was an application process. We filled out that application. We went through the process, the screening. I think it's important for consistency purposes that we're here. So I would rather not entertain the proxy. Yeah, I think it just creates an environment where we're starting over each time, but that's just my perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt. So just a clarifying question for you, Kurt, and then I'm going to go to Jenny, and then I see a comment in the chat. So for you're encouraging us not to entertain the idea of a proxy. What about for those folks who cannot attend as regularly? We would address it by having different members reach out to them and saying, asking them to connect, or I guess I wasn't quite sure that part was addressed for me. Go ahead, Kurt.
Sure. You know, I don't know the answer. I would just say that sounds really good to me. I think that's kind of a typical procedure of reaching out and saying you missed a few meetings. Are you going to be able to attend? If not, would you like to resign so we can fill that seat? It stays with the consistency and integrity of the system that we established at the beginning.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to Jenny, and then I'm going to go to the chat. Go ahead, Jenny.
Sorry about that. Thank you. I think it's very hard because I would be one of those people who would definitely benefit from a proxy. But I also think it's really hard to build community and build relationships when you have someone who's coming in as your proxy on a regular basis. And so it's something that is tricky. And I think that that's something that needs to be considered of, you know, what this group, what we're building with this group. I'm on a different group that has been meeting for over a year on a weekly basis. And the fact that we don't have proxies have really allowed us to build relationships where now I can say, I missed a meeting, but I trust everyone else at that meeting. And I know that they've made the best decision possible, even though I wasn't there to voice whatever my concerns were or my support was, because I know where everyone else stands because I've gotten to know them over the past year. So I think that we need to at least consider what that effect has on the group.
Great, thank you for that comment. And in the chat, Talk mentioned, I'm supportive of a proxy, and I'd go back to the attendance expectations of serving on the partnership? Yes, absolutely. And we'll get into a little bit more of the attendance piece and expectation piece as part of what the work group worked on. Esther also mentioned, I imagined a proxy would be someone from the group who would report back to the person who couldn't attend rather than someone outside of the group. Thank you for that. Rachel is also asking, does allowing for proxies create greater equitable access? There's some curiousness of what the group thinks on that. While you're thinking about that, I also want to acknowledge Alicia says, I'm generally not in favor of a proxy, but do understand the potential need of it. How about the question raised by Rachel about equitable access with use of proxies? Thoughts around that?
I'll jump in. This is Lauren with United Way. I think that in terms of using a proxy as for equity, that like kind of having the leadership of this committee examine that by a case-by-case basis is probably a good way to go. I think there are folks that, you know, don't need a proxy, and if they send one because they feel like they have to, it can create those problems that people have raised around building community and starting from scratch. But when there is a case where somebody is going on leave or needs to take an extended period or is missing a number of meetings for, you know, this reason or that, that having the option of creating a proxy by the approval of, you know, some set of people, that might make sense. And that kind of gives you the best of both worlds. And that way that person isn't necessarily starting from scratch. There's some, you know, ground setting and some protocol and process to get that person up to speed, and they're not just sitting there throwing, you know, whatever into the wrenches into the gears.
Thank you for that comment, Lauren. The work group did spend some time thinking about what that might look like if somebody is going out on medical leave, right, for 3 months. So they're gonna, let's say, miss 3 meetings, by offering the opportunity for a proxy and sharing that with, say, the executive committee, or excuse me, steering committee is what the work group had offered as some language. So the work group, the steering committee would, that would be the case-by-case scenario that you're suggesting. So somebody brings that forward and say, hey, I know I'm going out on medical leave. I'd like to offer up so-and-so within my organization as a proxy. How does that look? The steering committee would, you know, examine that case by case and either approve or deny. Yeah, so that's another way.
Yeah, and I would just add that in addition to somebody who's going out on medical leave, maybe they have some other circumstance where they're only able to attend sporadically, but they can have somebody who they work closely with in their organization or community to partner. So like, for example, I'm able to attend most Mondays, but I do not have childcare on Mondays, which makes it difficult from time to time. So while that's not medical leave, having the option of having a proxy, if that was like an ongoing, that's going to get resolved. But if it wasn't going to get resolved, maybe that would be something that, you know, like I could then like partner with somebody to have this spot.
Yes, thank you for that example. Do folks have any other comments? Other thoughts? This is really good conversation. This is exactly where the work group was kind of like, we need to take this one back to the group. Might this be a good opportunity now for us to move towards maybe doing kind of a quick thumbs up, thumbs down, or does somebody want to put a proposal on the table about whether or not to have proxies?
Sorry, I have one more clarifying question. I apologize. The lack of childcare is why I'm not on video and not using the chat function at all. I'm multitasking, but is there, has the steering committee of the group, or like whatever that might look like, has that been established, or is that still a proposal too?
Nope, steering
Because
committee
I
has
think
not.
it would be has not been set. Okay.
My apologies for
Thank you.
interrupting, Lauren. Sorry. No, the steering committee has not been established. Alicia, I think you want to jump in.
Yeah, yeah. And I would, one of my challenges is also childcare. Now, I generally am, I guess my thought process here is instead of, somehow I feel like we're doing this kind of backwards, where instead of talking about a proxy before attendance, I feel like we should be talking about attendance expectations before determining whether we would, as a group, we'd be okay with proxies or not. Because I think having that expectation or understanding those expectations might make it a little bit easier to determine whether or not a proxy is even something that we would need as a group in general.
Yeah, thank you for that. Do folks want to have a quick discussion about attendance and attendance expectations?
Jenny in the chat says, yes, please, new. And there are a couple other comments in the chat as well. So Stan said perhaps could be assessed by the steering committee, and Rachel says, I like case by case now that I've heard the thoughts. I just think giving folks permission if they need it is a good place to leave it. Okay. And then we have another yes to talking about attendance.
Okay. So as far as attendance, I'm looking back at the charter real quickly. And if some of the charter language says that members who miss more than 3 meetings in a year without announcement will be contacted by co-chairs, which we haven't established yet, or OHA staff to assess barriers to attendance and commitment to partnership. So it's been put in the charter, and again, we have not approved the charter, but that was some of the language that the work group has come up with, is missing 3 or more meetings in a year. What do folks think about attendance as what is needed to make this partnership move fluidly? What's that number, if there is one?
This is Alicia again. I think 3 is actually it's a reasonable number. Overall, missing 3 is a reasonable number, and I just wanted to clarify the wording on that. So does that mean missing 3 meetings without contacting anyone? So essentially just being a no-show period. Or does that mean, the person has reached out and said, hey, I can't make it today, or hey, I can't make next week? Is that included in that, in that 3 meeting kind of cutoff?
That hasn't been established. So that's probably up for open to interpretation and open to more clarification. Right now, where the charter stands, it's the wording is very general. So there's not the specific wording that would answer that question, Alicia. But what do folks in this group feel?
I don't necessarily want to speak on behalf of the committee that worked on it, but I think without announcement did mean without advance notification of missing the meeting.
Thanks, Susan.
Hi, Noon. This is Connie.
Hi, Connie.
Are all of these recorded? Are all of our meetings recorded? It is? Well, the reason I'm asking, say if I was in, okay, let's just say I was out of state, but I have my laptop with me and the meeting's Monday, but I'm doing something. Can I listen to the recording? Would that count, or how is this going to work? Because some people, they're not missing it, but they're going back and listening to the recording. How is that going to work out? Am I making myself clear?
You're very clear, Connie. So the question that Connie is putting out there is, you know, our work environments have changed, right? And so if I can't be there Monday and I can listen to the conversation on Tuesday, and if there's still opportunity to provide input, because some of that stuff we do online, does that count as me in attendance? And I'm throwing that out there as the group for discussion.
Thank you.
I think that was a great question, actually. I wonder if we could, you know, if that is, if something like that is the case, if we could just have, you know, a point person where, you know, the person who did miss the actual meeting but is then revisiting the recording, just kind of, you know, send the point person an email or, you know, a message saying, hey, I just, you know, I looked at, or I reviewed the recording from Monday's meeting, and, you know, here are my thoughts. And then we could use that, because then it would show that, you know, the person really did review the meeting, and not just say, okay, well, I looked at it, and then kind of sort of, you know, at least it would provide some sort of proof, I guess, to show that the person did review the material and review the recording, and therefore it could potentially be counted as attendance because they are providing. They did make the effort to review the meeting.
Okay, so let me try this. What I'm gathering in the last few bits here is that folks are interested in having the opportunity, when we talk about meeting membership and attendance, and when we say missing more than 3 meetings, that's really not like overlooked letting somebody know, whether it be the chair or staff or however, just like, you know, didn't let anybody know. But it's not necessarily about the in-person or this Zoom meeting attendance, but it's about not being there to participate fully. Is that what I'm hearing, folks? That's the type of missing attendance we're talking about, missing the meeting. I see a couple head nods for those of you who are on camera. I guess where I'm at as just helping you all process this is, do we feel, a couple thumbs up, that we're really talking about people for whatever reason not being able to attend 3 times a year? I see another thumbs up. So so let's talk about attendance. So let's just cover that piece right now with a quick thumb vote, and then we can talk about proxy. So this is just strictly about attendance, okay? And to help move our process. So for those of you who are on the membership, if you can make a signal, either thumbs up is yes. Okay, here, sorry, I'm like a little preoccupied for a second trying to formulate my thoughts. So the question on the table is, membership is defined by members who miss more than 3 meetings in a year without announcement. So by that we mean that they were unable to attend virtually, in person, and or not being able to actually review the online recording of the meeting and give input. So that's what we mean. So if you are in agreement with that, go ahead and do a thumbs up. If you're not so sure, sideways, or if you're really no thanks, down. Okay, and if you don't want to turn on your camera, you can go ahead and put it in the chat, thumbs up. And then if I could have Liz and Heather, OHA staff, just quickly help me do a visual. So that's 1, 2, 3, go ahead and vote. Thumbs up. Not so sure, need more information, sideways, or thumbs down. That should not be how we define missing 3 meetings.
Hey, New, I don't think Zoom
Yes.
allows for an option of sideways, and it's actually a little hard, and it's hard to see in the cameras. Thumbs can be somewhat small.
Yeah.
On my screen.
Okay.
I'm wondering if another option is if your thumbs up, do nothing. If your thumbs sideways or down, post it in the chat.
Okay. Okay.
And maybe you want to repeat the proposal
yes.
one more time.
Let me repeat the proposal one more time. And Liz, do you mind typing that in the chat? Because I can't type and chat and talk at the same time. If you can write that in the chat for those, thank you. So the question again, the proposal to the group is members who miss more than 3 meetings in a year without announcement. And by that we mean they are unable to attend physically, virtually, or follow up with the recording, would be contacted by co-chairs and OHA staff to look at attendance barriers. So I saw a quick message about clarification. Reviewing a meeting after the fact would not count as missing a meeting. Correct. That's what we were saying. So we just wanted to make sure we understood what missing a meeting would mean. And really what I'm hearing is from folks is that the intent is, it's about intent, right? It's about, I wanted to be there, but I wasn't able to for whatever reason, but I can quickly review minutes and give input if that is still available, right? Is that helpful, Susan? I saw your comment. I just want to make sure that that was helpful. Okay. And so with that, did we do a quick thumbs up, some thumbs sideways, or thumbs down? And for those of you who say sideways, it's really about what other questions, what other clarifications do you need to move forward and support the proposal, right? Okay.
No, I don't see any thumbs sideways in the chat or thumbs down.
Thank you, Liz. Okay. So I'm seeing us to go ahead and move forward with that particular definition. I know we're a little short on time. What I would like to do now as you all can see, the details can take a lot of time. And so what we may need to do is move these kind of more detailed pieces to the work group. The work group worked for an additional 2 hours outside of this meeting, and then some, just doing some reviewing. And so I would encourage us to go to perhaps the next item on the questions that they wanted to bring forward to you all. And then I'd also want to put out there that there may need to be another group to work on this for the month of between August and the next meeting in September, so that we can get it to a place that it's finalized with as many details as we want to put in there, and then send it out to the entire partnership for review, so that we can move to a place where we can say, yes, where it stands, it's not perfect, and we're not looking for perfection, but it's a working document that we feel can move us to the next level of business. Does that make sense? So I think that's kind of where this particular work group, they did a really nice job getting it to where we're at. But I think it's just kind of the detailed pieces really needs about another hour, maybe 2 hours in the month of August to fine tune, so that everybody gets a chance to look at it as a whole piece. Okay, so as we sit with that, I'm going to ask that real quickly, can we move to the next piece from the work group real quickly? I know, and that piece was around, we did membership. Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, this is Christy. I was thinking maybe we should talk.
Sorry, Christy.
To put the charter aside, and maybe talk a little bit about the in-person meeting.
Okay.
Does that work?
Okay, why don't we come back to this? Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so the next piece before we take our break and before our presenters, we have about an hour for our presenters, 15 minutes for the presenters. So the next piece is to quickly talk about the in-person meeting tentatively scheduled for September 13th. We had some news about whether or not originally when we met last month, we heard that the Portland State Office building would be open again starting September 1st, and now that has changed a little bit. So what I'll do is Kara, can I turn this over to you for a little bit and you can kind of discuss some of those details?
Yeah, hi everybody, thank you, New. I do want to just clarify that as of today, we're still planning that the Portland State Office building will open to the public on September 1st. We haven't heard anything differently. But sadly, we have also seen the landscape within our state and our nation and the world change since we last met, sadly. So I think we just wanted to open a conversation with you all as to whether you still wanted to plan to be meeting in person should the office be open in September as had been planned, or if that's something that you might feel more comfortable putting off for a little bit more time. I just recognize that everyone has different thoughts and feelings around this, and as well as kind of personal and community impacts of the pandemic, and we really wanted to just have you all help to make this decision. I'm happy to answer any questions, or New, if I didn't cover kind of all of the situation that we're dealing with, please let me know.
Yeah, thank you. Ian, I see that you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Rachel's comments. I think they already put it best.
Rachel has commented, I think we should put it off and create a good example. A couple of folks had said same. A couple of folks, I don't feel comfortable meeting in person in September. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say, with the schools opening up full on, I think by the end of September, we're going to be not being able to meet. So I'd support pushing it off.
Yeah,
Thank you, Amy.
I agree. I think aside from the COVID numbers and all of that happening, the in-person all day meeting was already a huge barrier for me to begin with. So I think on my end, and I put this in the survey as well, that neither of those dates would have worked for me. But I think in addition, setting a good example, or, the example as part of, a team of, headed up by OHA, I think there would be a good example for us to set to not attend in September.
Thank you. Thank you, Alicia. I'm seeing a lot of very similar sentiments in the chat. Would anybody like to propose, have a different viewpoint and offering a different slant on this? We welcome all thoughts, even if you just want to process out loud. Okay. I'm hearing an overwhelming desire to postpone that particular in-person piece. So the question might be, would we want to meet a little longer than 2 hours in September, given the proposed meeting was supposed to be from 9 to 3. The other piece would also be, is there specific things that we want to utilize that time in September to fine tune so that we can move forward a little more swiftly, thinking about either breaking up into smaller meetings with the work group, or how would you like to utilize that September meeting? It's a question about, can we have 2 longer meetings in September? Can you expand your thought on that, Alicia? Like 2 different days of longer meetings?
Yeah, that was kind of my thought process, just having two meetings instead of one really long one. Then we don't have to decide which pieces we need to kind of spearhead. Then maybe we can still get everything in the month of September, but just have 2 different meetings.
Okay. Thank you. There's a comment also that to finalize the charter and leadership details, it would be good to have some more time in September. Another comment about, I think 3 hours is a lot of staring at a Zoom. Yes, when people are juggling a lot of things in September, 2 meetings or even 2-hour meetings with a homework document for people may be easier to weigh in on. Thank you for that suggestion. Potentially longer meetings in September, good idea to have homework. So you all know that I'm an instructor at PSU, right? In one of my side hustles, homework. I don't know who's gonna grade all that stuff, but if you all want homework, we can do it. I think Christy and the rest of the crew can definitely give you a lot of homework. It is September. All right. So it looks like we're possibly be some homework, some really tangible things to move the group forward in our process. Okay. Anything else about that? And I don't want to overlook the thought that thank you for those of you who are really stating that we want to postpone the in-person meeting so that we can set that example before we head into the fall. Thank you for that.
And I just want to voice my disappointment too.
Okay.
We're not going to be able to.
With that, yeah.
But that time will come.
Yes. Another couple comments. By homework, do we mean maybe reviewing and voting? Online input outside group could be really onerous to try to socialize to the whole group. Yes. I imagine the homework would be more about contribution in meetings and not for you or OHA staff to grade. Thank you. I'm all about that. Thank you, Talk. All right. I think we're at the point of the meeting where let's take a quick break. If that works for all of you, we'll head back up at 2 o'clock promptly. So an 8-minute break. Go ahead and leave everything turned on and we'll come back for our presentations from our guests this afternoon. Thanks, everybody. All right, everyone, welcome back. I have that it's 2 o'clock and our guests are here to share with you some really valuable information. If you recall in our last meeting last month, we talked about really wanting to kind of dive in and do a little more learning throughout some of these meetings about some of the strategies, how it came to be, and what the landscape of these things, these particular issues look like in Oregon. So today what we do, we're going to cover 2 different priority areas. We're going to be covering adversity, trauma, and toxic stress. And for our presenters for that section, we have Mandy Davis with Trauma Informed Oregon. And then we also have Nurit Fischler from Oregon Health Authority. And so those folks will take on that piece. And then I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kylene Zimber and Kate O'Donnell also with the Oregon Health Authority. And they're going to be covering the topics in and around behavioral health. And so for this portion, we will have a time for question and answers as you all hear what they have to share and listen and process. So be sure to jot down those questions, but I'll have Mandy and Nurit go first, and we have 50 minutes for both presentations and the Q&A period. And so I'll probably pause folks and then give you that time to ask your questions, and then we'll go on with our next presentation from Kylene and Kate. Okay, so welcome folks. Glad to have you both here. And so all 4 of you, excuse me. And so I'll turn it over to Mandy and Nurit.
Thank you. Christy, is there anything you needed to say about the slides, or you good?
You're on mute, Christy.
Thank you. Sorry. Mandy, the slides are here for you to use as you need. So just let me know.
Okay.
And all that.
Excellent. So hi, everybody. I'm Mandy Davis with Trauma Informed Oregon and served on this committee of the adversity, trauma, and toxic stress, as well as Nurit. I was just going to take a few minutes and kind of talk a little bit about how we came to the strategies, and then I'll turn it over, let Nurit add anything. But we also just really wanted to open up to also just have you be able to ask lots of questions, or how'd you get here? What should we do about this? So this first slide is here to show the representation of people on that committee. So you can kind of take a moment, because I think that's important to know. of which the kind of knowledge was built from. And then we can, do you have a strategy? What do we have next? So these are the metrics. I think you're really focused on strategies right now, but we have these 3 metrics we were looking at, which is adverse childhood experiences, chronic school absenteeism, and then high concentrated disadvantage were the 3 ways we kind of decided upon to measure this. And then the strategies that were picked, and we had like probably 2 lists of those, right? So there's like 2 slides of this, and we can look at some of these. So I'm just going to kind of reacclimate to these. So ensure access to and resources for affordable, high quality, culturally and linguistically responsive childcare and caregiving, building family resiliency through trainings, developing community awareness of toxic stress and its impact. And then can we go ahead and skip to the next one, Christy, just to round this picture off. So then we have things like enhancing community resilience through promotion of art and cultural events for priority populations, requiring all public-facing agencies and contractors to receive training about trauma and toxic stress, provide safe, accessible, and high-quality community gathering places, such as parks and community buildings. So I just wanted to kind of pull a few of those, because I think the 3 things, the kind of 2 messages I'll tell you that our committee grappled with and worked on and played with, and to start with, I say, and I appreciate the work you were doing, because I know it's not easy to have to narrow big things down into 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 bullets and work. But a couple things. So you'll see in here, there's strategies that really impact individuals and families. There are strategies that are organizational focused, so like the public facing agencies. And then there's strategies that are community focused, like the art and cultural events. And the question that I think is probably going to need to be as part of this process is like, which of these strategies kind of lent, like where are we and which ones lent to the most work? But then I thought I would just kind of say, and like to me in summary, what we did in that large group of people that met is we started with like our knowledge and the science about what we know works, right, in those areas that we're trying to do. Adversity, thank you, I'll try to slow down. So the 3 areas of adversity, chronic absenteeism. So to address those things, we looked at what we know works: community, education, childcare, work family policies. And then we also, another criteria was to look at what was already existing. So what does Oregon already have in place? What can we build from, right? What can we build off of? What can we expand? So I would say those were really 3 of the primary ideas or ways in which we approach the work. What do we know works? And we spent some time there again with that body of knowledge of people. What do we know works? You know, what do we not know that we don't know that we want to pay attention to? So if there's not evidence, what else do we need to think about? What's already happening? And then what's across that individual, organizational, and community? So I think I'll stop there. Nurit, do you have thoughts about how we approached it that might be helpful before?
I think the only other thing I would add,
Nurit, we're not hearing you. It was gargled and then it went silent.
Maybe turn off your video, Nurit, because we're still not able to, it could be just the bandwidth, yeah, and see if that doesn't help it. Nope, still not hearing you. Oh, better.
okay. Better now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Okay. Just say is looking at those, because the first goal is about, and there are some strategies that really started to about around that upstream initial prevention, and that's kind of where those policy strategies and that kind of works, and some of the school-based work around prevention. And then we looked at what is the second goal around increasing resilience and promoting safe and connected communities and families. So there's some work around that and strategies in that area. And then the third goal is really about what do you do to mitigate trauma? How do you promote trauma-informed systems and services that assure safe and secure access and avoid re-traumatization? So sometimes it helps to think in those three buckets as well. Hopefully that's a helpful other frame. And you see those three goals, the website and the area from this adversity and trauma work.
Thank you, Nurit. It was still a little bumpy, so I'm going to try to repeat. But Nurit, feel free to put in the chat if I get that wrong. So it looks like I'm trying to see, keep up with the chat. So Liz, great. So what Nurit was doing was reminding us of the three goals. And so this idea of goal 1, right, was to prevent trauma, toxic stress, and adversity through data-driven policy and system change. Goal 2, increase resilience, promoting safe and connected and strength-based individuals, families, and communities. And then goal 3 is to mitigate when trauma's happened. So the strategies kind of are mapping onto this, like the prevention upstream, the mitigation, and then the bolstering resilience. And that's, you'll see that, I think, both in the individual, organization, and community strategies as they happen. So I'll stop there because I don't know if you want questions now or after the next folks.
No, why don't we stop there and go ahead and give people a chance to ask any questions, and then what we'll do is we'll go into the next piece, and then we can still have more question and answer toward the end. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat from Rachel. Do you have any data on specific ACEs and therefore specific strategies per ACE?
And for ACE, we mean adverse childhood events.
So Nurit, I don't know if you're able to share the most recently what data we have. So we do have data in Oregon on adverse childhood experiences, which is one of the metrics on the SHIP, the State Health Improvement Plan. It's an interesting question, Rachel, of whether we've mapped strategies. I don't know of anyone who's mapped strategies per ACE. If we could surely look at those ACEs, it'd be an interesting thing to do. Yeah, I'd have to think about whether anybody's done that.
Yeah, I was just digging through. That's a really awesome document. Thank you for putting it in there. And I was looking through them all, and they seem to just be like clumped as ACEs as opposed to the very specific. And some of them are ACEs that are called out individually. And so it just got me curious.
Yeah, and I know there's been some work when kind of some of the newer surveys are really trying to think a little deeper about what we're asking about, and is there a way to connect some of that so we get more, so we do get more better data to target interventions.
There was another question, Mandy, around rural areas specifically. What ways are you connecting with families in rural areas?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is like a question to me because I'm at Trauma-Informed Oregon, so I can speak to that. But regarding this, that would be one of the, I mean, actually, I think we had several voices in rural areas that spoke about this, enhancing community resilience through the promotion of art and cultural events is where a lot of that came from, and having spaces that people could have access to. So like that would be, to me, connecting with families in rural areas would be part of these, would definitely be like a quality assurance on these strategies, right? That if you're going to require, if you're going to, let's see, provide safe, accessible, and high quality community gathering places, you're considering that in all places. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, Connie. Feel free to clarify or correct me.
No, that was it, Mandy. I was just wondering how this was. A lot of times the rural areas get kind of left by the wayside.
Absolutely.
No pun intended. But sometimes it's those communities that need it the most.
Yeah, and I think
This is Marie. Can,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to see if that was working any better. I was going to say in relation to the rural areas, I think that is a really important point. And we have been funding Trauma and ACEs work through our Title V work that goes all around the state for the last 5 years. And both some of the tribes and some of the rural communities have done a lot of interesting work that's very different than what the more urban areas are doing. So I think that is a really important thing to look at as we roll out these strategies.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think two things I would add to that is I think as strategies get prioritized, like, right, that's where that becomes like some of these strategies I think are really great because they like what that looks like is going to be dependent on, right, the community, the population that's working. And then also I think some of the strategies, if you could scroll to the one above the list above that, Christy, when you get into things like ensure access to and resources for affordable, high quality, culturally and linguistically responsive childcare and caregiving. Like if that were a prioritized strategy, that has to be looked through the lens of all of those things, right? Including what are the limitations in rural areas, access to training, access to buildings, access, those type of things.
Are there other questions folks wanted to specifically ask in and around the area of trauma and toxic stress?
I have a question. Of the sort of objectives that we have listed under here, are there any that you guys are finding to be, maybe like the keystone objectives where if we can really concentrate efforts on one of these, it will touch more of the other ones, and then therefore we as a ship should be very interested in putting energy towards implementation of that one in particular? Any insight that you guys might have having been way deep into the data?
Harriet, you want to go first?
No, I think it's hard to pick. Let me take a look. I was just going to kind of take a look through these strategies, but if you have a place you want to start, Mandy, go for it.
I was like, yeah, good. Have fun with that, Rachel. But I think a couple of things came to mind when I was revisiting this for this to come to you all, because I had to remind myself. One of the questions I was thinking that I would be asking if I were in your position is of these is exactly that question. Do we know anything about these strategies that the data is showing us are exponentially, so I'd want to be smart, like I want to pull that data. But when I think about affordable, high quality childcare and caregiving is a pretty significant one, right? Mm-hmm. So and that one's likely going to maybe lead to another one. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the right question. And the second question I was interested in is of these strategies, for instance, ensure all school districts are implementing K-12 comprehensive, I've got too many screens in front of me, sex education, comprehensive health education according to law. Like that one's interesting because that's already there. Mm-hmm. And so to move the dial on that one may be less because it's about supporting or adding so like that one may go to the top for me because it's already, all the infrastructure is there. It just needs to be moved differently or supported. So I think for each of those, that's what I would be doing is what's already happening, how much more do we do to move that forward? And then what's the return on investment? Mm-hmm. And do one of these connect to the other? And that's exactly what you asked me to answer. And I just gave it back to you and said.
And
you told me to do that thing that I said. No, it's good. I think, this committee has been starting to, because there's 82, 67, something like that objectives. And, we have 5 years. So which ones do we start now? And then which ones are likely going to move the needle the most or take the longest or, what have you, just because we're in the prioritization phase. And while all of them are good and necessary, we can't do all of them at the same time or at once. So I think that this is great. I really appreciate, Christy, thank you for bringing the data on it. That really helps me, and Mandy and Nurit, thank you. This is really cool.
Yeah, I would say also just, I think Mandy's piece about what's already going on and what are the low-hanging fruit is great. And then also the question of, you know, what's really the upstream, what are the upstream strategies that connect across priorities and have real potential for impact at the big level. When I look at family-friendly policies, that's really where a lot of the family stress and trauma work can sit. It's a big move a lot of the time, but sometimes there are pieces that are really worth focusing on because we can really make a change in people's lives because we focus on some policy work and making the stress of parenting and family life really much relieved in communities around the state. So I think it's worth looking at both the low-hanging fruit and the places that we can really have large impact and where there's a weaving together with other areas of work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Rachel. And I hope this gives folks an opportunity to process some of the questions that they had around what does this specific strategy, what does it mean and what does it entail? What I'd like to do, are there any other questions for Mandy and Nurit at this time? We can come back to more questions as they bubble up for you, but I wanted to give folks another opportunity to ask any type of clarifying questions. I think this conversation is really helpful when we're processing what these strategies look and mean. Okay, I don't see any hands. What I'd like to do is go ahead and shift gears slightly and move into behavioral health. And so I'm going to turn that over to Kylene and Kate to give us the overview of that.
Thanks, New. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate O'Donnell. I'm the Women's Health Systems Coordinator at the Public Health Division in the Maternal and Child Health section. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our subcommittee process. I was the co-chair of that subcommittee, and then I'm going to hand it over to Kylene to talk about all of the things that have happened kind of subsequent our subcommittee group. I guess a couple of things for context. So as I'm sure you are aware, these meetings happened kind of pre-COVID, pre a lot of things that we're dealing with now. They also, as far as behavioral health, I mean, this was an issue that was identified pretty clearly near the top of importance by folks in focus groups and surveys. And these conversations were happening as big shifts were going on in the behavioral health landscape in Oregon. So this was happening during the governor's Behavioral Health Advisory Committee conversations. This was happening with the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission was convening. However, this was also before some really big legislative investments in behavioral health, which Kylene will talk about. So all of that was kind of swirling as we were having these conversations. And we were trying to figure out like, what is our role and what's our lane in doing this work? And so a decision was made, and I'm not sure if this was already explained to y'all, but even though the subcommittee was called Behavioral Health, there was already a parallel process happening with the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission related to strategic planning and prioritization for issues related to alcohol and other drugs. And so the decision was made that this group was actually going to focus more on mental health. And then any recommendations that came out of the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission would kind of be combined together. And so together it would be behavioral health, but our subcommittee was really going to be focusing on mental health. there was also a lot of discussion. If you've looked at the previous version of the SHIP, it was very focused on what I would call coping behaviors, but I think was couched in the term risk behaviors. So it was things like smoking or drug use. And really a conversation was happening in this subcommittee about moving the focus upstream and thinking about what are some of the factors that relate to people's mental health and wellness. So that's, you know, things like social determinants of health, ACEs, trauma, racism, oppression, access barriers to health services. And so we also were positioning ourselves knowing that Mandy and Narit and the Trauma and ACEs group was working on things and trying to figure out what do we focus on and what fits within the Trauma and ACEs group, because we wanted to do it all. We wanted to talk about resiliency. We wanted to talk about access. And so those strategies and activities and goals kind of went between our two groups, which you can see from what's in the ACEs and trauma list of strategies. And then you'll see when we get to the behavioral health ones. So after a lot of conversations, our two goals were really focused on issues related to stigma and awareness around mental health issues. So kind of reducing stigma, as the group identified that as a big barrier for people entering into care and reaching out for support. And then the second goal that we had was really a big bucket, and it was related to increasing resilience at like the individual, community, and systems level to improve access to a coordinated system of prevention, treatment, and recovery, which is really big. And we'll go into, I don't know if you want to scroll down, you can see how that kind of stepped out. So these are the measures that were identified for how we can assess our success. But if you keep going down, these are kind of some of the strategies that we developed kind of under those goals. So I'm gonna stop there. That's just like the 3-minute overview of what the process has been. And then I'll turn it over to Kylene to talk about what has happened since then and kind of where we're at with implementation.
Great, thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. This is my first time at this group. My name is Kylene Zimber. I am the Behavioral Health Operations Director. I report directly to Steve Allen, who is the Oregon Health Authority Behavioral Health Director, and I sort of function as his deputy. And so, as Kate mentioned, the behavioral health landscape is vast these days. And, you know, after generations, truly generations of disinvestment in the behavioral health system, we are at a moment in time that I thought I would never see in my lifetime, where we have enormous investment opportunities ahead of us in the behavioral health system. And so I'll talk a little bit about what led to that and then kind of where we're headed with it. So as Kate mentioned, when COVID hit, we already had a system that was completely under-resourced, and we had already pretty significant experiences of people falling through the cracks in a variety of different ways who were not getting adequate access to behavioral health services. We're seeing people who are getting arrested for minor crimes and showing up at court unable to aid and assist in their own defense due to their mental illness, to the point that we were being sued by the federal government because we didn't have enough placements at Oregon State Hospital to hold them all. We had a system of care for the children's system that was essentially crumbling and falling apart, and children being placed out of state because there was lack of resources in Oregon to deal with their complex needs. And the list could go on and on. Then COVID hit, and it got worse, as you can imagine. But in the course of COVID, we learned a lot of things. One of the things that happened was the rest of Oregon became really focused on and interested in the behavioral health system. And as Kate mentioned, the governor had already, before COVID, appointed a governor's behavioral health advisory council to address some of the major needs. Then in November of 2020, voters passed Measure 110, which decriminalized the possession of hard drugs and basically directed Oregon to create a more treatment-focused response to drug use and drug abuse. And then the legislature came to town and virtually, and again, in the first time in my very long career, I saw the legislature specifically focused on behavioral health through subcommittees in their substantive committees, as well as in their Ways and Means financial committees. And coming out of that was massive investment in the behavioral health system. The sort of factors that lead to the ability to do that include, we started with CARES Act funding from COVID, that continued. Then the American Rescue Plan provided additional big resources. The state general fund is looking well, and then Oregon's marijuana tax revenues all sort of combined to make a perfect storm of financial resources so that we can no longer use money as our primary excuse for why we're not adequately addressing the needs of people in the state. Anyway, the legislature passed a number of bills, and there are several key buckets in these bills that address issues of housing and residential treatment needs, that address the children's system, that address the needs of people who have intensive service needs, particularly co-occurring disorders of substance use and mental illness, and also of physical health issues or intellectual developmental disabilities combined with mental illness. Huge investment in the crisis system. The other thing that's happening is that at the federal level, they've designated a new phone number, 988, to be a companion to 911, which will be a it's sort of the shortcut number for what was traditionally the suicide prevention response. This is a broader crisis response and behavioral health response line that people will be able to call. And underneath that is a whole crisis system development that is also being really well financed by the state legislature and the federal, through our federal partners. So there's just all this activity going on at once. Unfortunately, one of the big roadblocks we have right now is that there aren't enough people to do the work that needs to be done. And we're hitting really major workforce investments. We already had problems in our behavioral health workforce not being representative of the people that we serve. And so there was already a move afoot to create some workforce investments to help us sort of grow a new set of folks who would make behavioral health services their careers, who would be appropriately representative across all sort of sectors of our population, and effectively reflect the needs of the people who receive services from them. In the short term, however, post-COVID, we're also finding that we actually have somewhat of a workforce crisis, in that our facilities and our programs, and this is true in the medical side of OHA's business as well, they're just not able to fill vacant positions. And so again, no matter how much money we have, if we don't have people to pay to do the work, that's another challenge for us. So we also have a big workforce initiative that has sort of the immediate short-term goals to it, as well as the bigger longer-term goals. So I know I don't have a lot of time today, and I'm not really sure where folks want to focus, but that was sort of the big, broad programmatic summary. The other piece to this, too, that I think you all might be interested in is we also historically have had disinvestment in our data systems and in the ability to be able to know what our outcomes are and reliably track outcomes. And so data integrity has been kind of a long-standing issue in the behavioral health system. And we did get some resources also to invest in the modernization of our data systems and how we do our business, so that we can have better tools to help us transform the behavioral health system. Finally, one of the big pieces of legislation that came through, it was House Bill 2086. And it's kind of an omnibus bill, but one of the main elements of it is the establishment of a behavioral health metrics and incentives committee. And through the lessons that we learned when we set up Measure 110 Advisory Committee, we intend to sort of proceed with this committee in a similar way. And just to quickly backtrack, as you guys know, the OHA mission goal prime directive is eliminate health inequity by 2030. So when Measure 110 passed, we saw an opportunity to transform our system and do business differently. And so when the measure itself requires us to have an advisory council. So when we set up this advisory council, we intentionally went forth to do business differently. And we selected a council with a focus on having it completely filled with people who have lived experience and who represent community, particularly communities of color. And that committee is not just advising us, they are actually directing our work. So, and that's a real, it sounds like a nuance, but it's a real cultural shift for us. We don't go in and say, hey, here's the product, what do you think? Great, thanks, we're gonna go do that now. We go in and they tell us what it is we need to do, and we say, all right, we'll figure out how to get that done. So big cultural shift for us in our, the way we run our business. And not easy, it's very difficult, but we're doing that. So when we set up this metrics and incentives committee, we intend to set it up in a similar fashion, centered on equity and people with lived experience, to help us establish a set of metrics and incentives that then transfer into our contractual relationships with those who deliver services, so that we have a system ultimately that is transformed. It is simple to access, responsive to the needs of people, and provides meaningful outcomes in their lives. So that was a really quick high-level overview, and I'm certainly happy to take questions or talk in more detail about anything specifically.
Thank you, Kylene. Thank you, Kate. Let's open the floor for questions and comments. Rachel, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Thank you. Kylene, thank you for giving us an overview. I'm curious, I think you sort of touched on it a little bit, but wondering if you guys have specific strategies around the workforce for behavioral health. I know that you mentioned that there's a crisis, and I mean, yes, and what are some of your strategies around it?
Yeah, so there are actual strategies. I'm gonna talk the long term first. One of my favorite quotes as I watched my boss Steve do his legislative presentations was, you know, the best time to plant a shade tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. So we're planting our shade trees now, and there is a fair amount of money out there, $80 million to be exact, that is sort of sitting and waiting for us to come and get from the legislature to do that work. And there are a variety of strategies, and I'm not the expert on that particular initiative, and so what I would recommend is we're actually running that through our Health Policy and Analytics Office, and Mark Overbeck and Neelam Gupta are the team that are running that that particular initiative. But it was informed by the Governor's Behavioral Health Advisory Council. It includes things like really accelerated investments in scholarships, in initiatives to like pay off the cost of someone's education if they'll come and work in our system, curriculum development that is particularly focused on specific communities, again, to attract people to those communities. And then probably most important to most people is there's a lot of discussion about the rates that we pay, and there's quite a bit of work going on to evaluate what those rates ought to look like. So that's going to be one of the key pieces of strategy, as well as just making sure that rates are sufficient to attract the workforce that we need. So there's also some studies going on in that regard. Right now, for some of our behavioral health programs, they pay $19 an hour, and I think Starbucks is paying something close to that. So it's like, we're really competing with the big world out there as far as the folks that we serve. But on whole, what we find is people are attracted to this kind of work, and we just have to compensate them with living wages to bring them in, and good working conditions. So it was kind of a scattershot answer, but we're looking at a variety of things. And on the short-term crisis, of course, we're looking at things like, is it possible for us to fund some bonuses for people, retention bonuses, and also, sign-on bonuses if you come and work. Additional staffing to help relieve overtime, although of course you're faced with couldn't get the staff to begin with. Don't know if additional staffing will help. Maybe staffing through private agencies. Looking at working conditions in facilities, so maybe paying for childcare, maybe paying for better insurance. So just exploring all kinds of options. So there's a lot going on. Yeah.
I would just add to that, I think workforce was a big component of our discussion in the behavioral health subcommittee when we were coming up with these strategies. It is one of the strategies on the list. And I think specifically we were also interested in thinking about different types of providers. So that could include like peer support specialists, like BIPOC specific providers, like how do we support folks of color to become providers, like either through loan repayment programs or things like that. And I will say that is something that I think it was one of those things that was named during the committee conversations and has just again and again, as Kylene mentioned, just come up as a huge area of unmet need and an area that OHA is still working to prioritize and give funding towards.
And we do have the funding for it. We just have to proceed with the process now to execute it. And related to that one, to kind of tangentially related, besides workforce, housing is the other one that's sort of one of these broader social Oregon issues that impacts incredibly difficult impact on the behavioral health system. As folks who have behavioral health issues often have difficulty getting access to housing, and certainly when there's no housing to be had by anyone, that makes it even more difficult. So there's a lot of work going on on the housing end of what we're doing as well. And I mean, it's just a broad portfolio of work that we're trying to stand up quickly before the moment expires. The federal funds are available for approximately 5 years. The state funds, of course, run on biennial cycles. And then the legislature is willing to give us funding, but they're sort of saying, well, you got to tell us how you're going to do it. And we got to trust that you're doing it right. So we have a little bit more work to do with the legislature too, to make sure that they are comfortable with the direction that we're headed. And I think that the real focus here is that equity, eliminating health inequities. And that's real critical that we're able to make that work and that we're good at doing that work. The other piece that we're also working on is really just eliminating, completely disrupting business as usual, completely transform the system, and completely eliminate the structural barriers that create an environment, particularly of racism. And so we've also been looking at things like how we do our business, how do our contracts look, how easy or difficult is it to do business with us. If you're a community-based organization, what's your relationship with us, and how do we make those better, and how do we make more space at the table for the sort of non-dominant culture to come in and help us understand and work together with us so that we can be sure that we're providing services in manners that are trusted. One of the things that really shined that we saw during COVID and during the wildfires is there are communities out there who really don't trust government and really don't trust the federal government, that really don't trust the county governments. And so how do we reach people through channels that they trust, and working with alternative kinds of organizations like the churches and the barber shop, or the local community organization or club that someone belongs to. So we're really trying to really broaden our sense of who we do business with, and that's definitely a direction that the legislature supports, and so our job is to figure out how to make that happen.
Alicia, sorry, Kylene, I'm going to pause you for a second. Alicia, do you want to go ahead and ask your question that you had in the chat, specifically around prevention?
Yeah, so I have, I guess, two questions. One is, actually, I'm going to go ahead and do this differently. So one of them, Rachel had just mentioned that in her experience, it's not necessarily the pay, but that it's the work environment. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I would say that in our area, we are struggling with care coordinators, retaining care coordinators, hiring care coordinators and therapists. And it's, I mean, we have had, I believe, at least two care coordinators leave Family and Youth Services to go find, work in other areas within a 3-week period. So that's a huge thing. And within the last, I want to say 3 months or so, we've had at least one therapist that I know of that left. And it's hard to say, that it's just the pay, because I believe that a lot of us go into this work knowing that we're not going to be paid, a lot of money. Like many of us go into this work knowing and understanding that this is not an occupation or an occupational field that's going to make us rich anytime soon. We do this because this is what we love. I am in my last semester of getting my my master's degree right now in forensic psychology. I'm not doing this because there's this a lot of money coming my way. I do this because this is what I enjoy and what I like, and this is the theme, right, that I've heard from other people and other care coordinators, people who work in this area. So I would wholeheartedly agree with Rachel on that, is that I believe it's a work environment more than anything, or the work environment has a greater impact. Now, to my two questions, what I have seen in our area, where we struggle a lot of times is, or the community struggles, is in various admissions, complaint, and grievances processes. So one of the things that I have noticed is that, or my question, I guess, is what, or is there have there been conversations about improving, or what the or have there been conversations about making various submissions and complaints and grievances processes more accessible to community members? Because a lot of times now we don't even know who to contact when we have a grievance. We don't know where to go, which person or which agency do we contact when there is a grievance, and then sometimes we just get sent back and forth and nobody knows what to do and where to go. Then also, are there discussions about protections for individuals who do utilize the grievances and complaint process? because one of the things that I have heard from several family members is that they just plain and simply worry about making a complaint, calling in a grievance, or submitting a barrier, because they're worried about retaliation. They're worried about losing services for their family. They're about losing services for themselves. So that's question number one. Question number two is also in the area that I reside, is that a lot of times families are told that prevention is more like kind of education, right? So instead of looking at prevention being we're providing preventative services, the preventative services are pamphlets with crisis numbers, just general information about, what does anxiety look like? What can you do? What is depression? What does depression look like? Or, what are some of the signs of a teen who may be thinking of or having thoughts of ending their own life? But there's no real kind of or I don't want to say that there isn't at all. It's just, it is extremely challenging to get actual preventative services. And then when you do get in, it's more like, oh, well, this is like a really, really short-term thing. So you can only have it for short-term. And then it's just it's a fight to kind of express what family members believe is or would be helpful for their family member, or for their youth, or for their husband or partner or wife, or and it's really difficult to get that across sometimes. And all we really get is a pamphlet, more paperwork. And so I guess I'm just really kind of wondering, are there conversations about what prevention really is going to look like or should look like? So that's one piece. And I just wanted to say that I'm absolutely ecstatic about the fact that we're discussing collaborating and improving the integration between behavioral health and other agencies, particularly behavioral health and DD services, because I think there's a huge overlap between the two, between mental health and DD, but they really don't necessarily work together a lot of times. So I'm really excited about that one. But yeah, those are my two questions.
Thanks, Alicia. I know we don't have a lot of time, but maybe Colleen, you can, Colleen and Kate, and you can wrap that up in the next couple minutes. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think Alicia, you really stated some key issues. These are the kind of things we're trying to transform, and hearing, directly from you about what you're concerned about. It's super helpful. I think the complaints process, I recognize your frustration with that. I'm equally frustrated, and I'm sitting there on the other side where we'll get complaints sometimes and it will have bounced all over our agency, and it's sort of like nobody knew, what to do with it because we never seen anything like it. I don't know. But anyway, we're trying to strengthen that, although I think we have a long ways to go. One of the things we do have is our ombuds office, which helps a little bit in that there are human beings that you can talk to who can help direct your issue. I think sometimes too we get complaints that we don't have a solution to, which is also a real challenge. And again, these are systematic things that we gotta figure that out. And a lot of times it is just what you were talking about, these cross-system barriers where someone presents and they have intellectual and developmental disabilities and they have mental illness, and neither system can treat both, and so the person ends up getting nothing. And we can't keep doing that. We've got to do better. So those things are definitely on our radar screen to work on, and we're actively working on the complaints process. We actually have an internal process looking at that, so hopefully it'll get better soon. But again, you know, also how complicated our system is with so many different fund sources braided together to create the dollar for mental health or behavioral health. So you've got Medicaid, and you've got, you know, whatever is the federal, some other federal fund, and you've got something on from child welfare, and you get it all together, and it's like nobody's really sure like how to then take that mix and figure out who's responsible. So we have a lot of work to do to make that go easier. And then protections for people who complain. That's just got to be there, and we've got to make it so people do trust that there won't be retaliation. And we still have to make that case, you know, and make the case that people don't need to be afraid, and that we need to hear their complaints, or we can't fix the system. And then on the prevention conversation, I absolutely agree with you. We've got to do a better job of actually not requiring someone to be in a state of crisis just to get service, or not requiring someone to be, you know, so ill before we address their needs. And it happens over and over and over again. And we've got to back that up where people can actually get services when it's going to do them good at the moment of the trauma, or at the moment that they have a need. Not at the point that it's festered for 6 years and then they're in these crisis states. So that is part of the sort of overall conversation that we're having about how to completely transform the system so that we're dealing with people as human beings and addressing their needs when and how they present. A lot of work to do.
Thank you, Kylene. Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
I would just add from the work group standpoint. So when we were talking about prevention, we were also thinking about those health related social needs that people have. So things like housing, things like food, kind of like those basic things that are also prevention and support mental wellness. And so those are things that you'll see kind of throughout the SHIP more broadly, and they are all just so related to behavioral health. Additionally, there's a strategy in there around like suicide prevention, and that's work that's already happening right now, both in the public health division and health systems division. There's the youth suicide intervention and prevention plan, which does a lot of prevention focused work around specific groups. Recently, they gave money to LGBTQI plus nonprofits that work with young people on like different prevention kind of focused activities. So creating safe spaces for them, trusted relationships with adults, those kinds of things throughout the state. I think there was one recently I heard about in Klamath County that's doing like pretty incredible resiliency focused work. And so that's kind of that more kind of upstream prevention work. And there's a similar effort going on right now for an adult version of the Youth Suicide Intervention Prevention Plan, the Adult Suicide Intervention and Prevention Plan, which is looking specifically at more high-risk populations, so like veterans, older adults, and things like that. So those are just a slice of some of those prevention things that are happening right now.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. I would, if I could just kind of just throw in just really quickly, in terms of prevention, I would maybe even suggest that if, you know, just listening to the person that is actually accessing the service or program, because a lot of times it's well, you know, I have the education, I've been working in this, and, you know, you don't really, you know, you don't check all the boxes, so therefore I really can't do anything. I think it would be very, very valuable to ensure that, you know, we have family voice, individual or self-advocacy voice in this when we're talking about prevention, especially prevention.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, everyone. I want to just give a shout out to our presenters today. All four of you just brought so much more knowledge to this group, I think, overall with the landscape of what's going on in Oregon. So thank you, Kylene, Kate, Nurit, and Mandy. We appreciate all that information. I would imagine that even some of our partnership folks might even reach out to you to further have the conversation in the future. What I want to do now in the last few minutes that we have is that knowing that we will be having our September meeting on the 13th, there's still quite a bit to do. I'm going to actually ask for 2 work groups to kind of move forward in this next month. So thinking about doing like an hour to 2 hours of additional work. So those folks who have worked on the charter, thank you, Stan, Susan, Rachel, Timur, and Amy. Thank you. And I would say we need that same work group or additional folks who want to have been energized by today's conversation to step forward and go ahead and join. Let me know. Reach out to me via email. And I would also ask for 2 volunteers from this group to work with Christy and myself to help formulate what the next meeting will look like. That's really helpful for us in topic areas, in the length of time, whether you might see it as a 2-parter, meeting for September, since we talked about really trying to push a little more with completing the charter, getting a steering committee pulled together. So just being able to sit and help process. You all have seen how great it is when we have so many more voices, and yet a smaller work group would really help move this forward. And in lieu of, y'all don't have a leadership team yet, and so that's why we're kind of pushing for this, right? So that you all can get to that point where you have standing meetings to kind of help formulate it. And so that's kind of why it's been a little more our suggestions, but we really want that to come from you all and not be the ones setting up the agenda. We want it to really be coming from this partnership. So if that sounds like something you have time for in the next month, please reach out to Christy or myself to volunteer for those 1 or 2 things. So additional kind of completing that charter work group piece, and or 2 to 3 volunteers to help figure out what our agenda looks like for September 13th meeting. Any last questions and comments in the last minute that we have together this afternoon?
I just want to put a plug in for the 2 open office hours that we scheduled. If you found the presentation and discussion around trauma and toxic stress and behavioral health helpful today for further grounding in the priorities and strategies, we're going to be doing this same type of conversation on those other priority areas, and include folks who participate on the subcommittee. So really hope you can join us. Those should be on your calendar. We will record them and share them. So if you're not able to make it, there'll be other ways to access that information.
So if there's nothing else, be on the lookout from emails from Christy and myself to encourage you folks to jump in for extra hour of meeting with the 2 of us and others within your partnership. So with that, I say thank you. 3 o'clock, we're on. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. Please reach out to Christy or myself if you have any questions or comments or concerns. We can totally do that via email in this next month too. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, New. Thanks, everybody.
Nice talk, you all.
Take care. All right.
All right.
You. I'll reach out.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mark. Did that go better, Mark? Maybe I need to end it. Here we go. Mark, are you there?
Uh-oh.
We can follow up.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
That was good.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's good. This charter thing is just a pain in the butt, though, isn't it? But once you open up a question, people are ready to converse about it, but you can't just move too quickly, but we're moving at a snail's pace on this. So what I think I'm going to do, Christy, is really, I do think you could use a couple more volunteers to help think about what September might look like, especially now that there's not going to be a something in person. So it might need to be a shorter time frame or stick with the 2 hour. I don't know. It seemed like there was a lot of ambivalence to whether we add like additional work group meetings, but maybe we'll work on that, and then hopefully somebody will step up and volunteer. And then the charter work group, I might ask whether Alicia or was it Lauren, who was also one of the folks who voiced their concerns about proxies and stuff today, to join that, in which we could maybe take 1 or 2 of those folks and ask them to volunteer to work on next month's meeting, so that they don't feel like, oh, I'm stuck on this charter work group forever. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? You have any thoughts on that?
I think if people are, where people are interested,
Yeah.
grab them.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I'm trying to think, do we need to reach out to some of the folks who haven't been as chatty? I don't know. Because I feel really bad that we didn't get to those other 2 things that we wanted from the work group, but I know that's just kind of part of the process.
Yeah, and it's hard to know where to spend time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, think about things. Let's touch base and think about whether you want to move. You feel like we need to push and move in the progression, see what Kara thinks if we're just moving way too slow. I do think there's a sense of urgency from the folks who were working on the work group to like, hey, let's get this nailed down, send it out. We agree, or we approve, or not approve, and then let's just keep moving,
Yeah, because it doesn't have to be perfect, right?
No, no, not at all.
Document that like people can live with for now, and we'll revisit it,
Yep.
whenever. So yeah. I'll do some thinking, and then
okay, sounds good.
Next week, I'll send an email out though, at least tomorrow, if not the next day, around the 2 takeaways around contacting you about the work group, and then if they want to help plan the agenda.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought this one great. People seemed really engaged and interested, and good questions, and I think people got in the right direction, so that's great.
Yeah, and the presentations were good. Yeah. Okay. All right, I'll see you. I'm going to try to join the one with Natasha and somebody else.
Tim
yes. Yes. Yeah. All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.